tear down the walls that we've used to compartmentalize. These are not walls, they're bridges. These are various incarnations, just like a teenager. When they turn 12, okay, this is how tall you are. 15, this is how tall you are. And what we've been doing, from my perspective, is we have compartmentalized them, not realizing these are various evolutions and incarnations of a singular intelligence that by virtue of diversifying itself in our eyes, Nick Pope was like, look, he goes, I know for a fact that the bodies, the NHIs we have in our possession have interdimensional characteristics. Full stop.
Welcome, everyone, to Cosmic Convergence, where we delve into the fascinating world of extraterrestrial intelligence, consciousness, and the mysteries of the universe. My name is John, and I'm joined by my co-hosts George, Daniel, Christian. You can find all of our social media links, including our Discord, in the descriptions below. For today's interview, we are joined by the distinguished and world-renowned demonologist, author, and paranormal researcher, Mr. Nathaniel J. Gillis. Mr. Gillis's research for over 20 years in demonology is unique and expansive. He posits that while many people are experiencing with the UFO and alien abduction phenomena are actually demonic beings that are trying to possess humanity with microchip technology and alien implants. But that's not all, because a central idea in Gillis's studies is the notion that demons can self-replicate through a process known as hybridism. This theory proposes that these supernatural beings, often portrayed as alluring demons, can produce hybrid entities by interacting with humans, resulting in the formation of hybrids that are human and demonic in nature. Through his hypothesis, Mr. Gillis establishes a connection between the demonic world and a distinctive reproductive method, which is often highlighted in alien abduction reports worldwide. Embark with us on a journey through the dark passages of the phenomena as Mr. Gillis intricately details his philosophies, research, and conclusions. For make no mistake, there is some form of malevolency at play, and his contributions to the field are significant and provide a distinctive perspective to interpret these enigmatic topics. Thank you, Mr. Gillis, for joining us today. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you with us, and I've been waiting for this for a long time.
Thank you for the invitation. When I received it, of course, I already knew George, and it's a pleasure and honor for me to meet you guys. Thank you for having me on the show, and I look forward to our dialogue.
Excellent. I had a kind of a, some would consider a softball question, but I didn't know this about you previously, so I apologize that before we delve into the depths of your theories, I read that you lived in a house that was haunted.
Mm-hmm.
Was it due to the occurrences in the house that led you down the exploratory path of demonology in your conclusions? Or can you describe one or more instances within the house?
Yeah. So that was my very first confrontation with this intelligence. And for those, you'll see more and more as we get into the work that I believe it is a singular intelligence we're dealing with. So that's why I'm referring to it as singular. But yes, my first confrontation with this intelligence was at the open house prior to actually purchasing and moving in. My dad had led me by the hand into my future room, and the only thing that was present in the room was just a bed, nothing else, nothing in the closet, nothing. So there were two distinct memories that I think of every time I talk about this encounter. Number one, when I went into the room itself, there was a profound stench that accompanied it. It smelled like rotting, or as Dr. Barry Taft would say, rotting or decomposing organic matter. There was nothing in there, and yet I could smell something. And so at a certain point, I got on my hands and knees, and for some unknown reason, I looked underneath the bed, upon which I was met face to face with a full-bodied apparition of a little girl. She was around my same age, maybe a couple years younger. She had long black hair and pale complexion, and she had a long white linen dress. So we left the house, and that's when I started my inquiry. Who was that? What was that I encountered? Sure enough, when we moved into the house itself, that entity mutated in its pathology. It was definitely not a little girl at all. And so when it evolved into shadow figures, full-blown conversations occurring above my head at nighttime, this pervasive presence that would just drench the room. that would kind of go into the next step, which included a looping nightmare over and over again, where two individuals, one was always seen with a needle in his arm. He's 8 years old. I didn't even know what insulin was or what sugar diabetes was, much less drug addiction. The other figure would constantly put a gun in his mouth and pull the trigger. Then I would wake up and frozen in fear. I didn't know what to do. And so that was my very first encounter with this phenomenon. And yes, was absolutely instrumental in where I am in the field right now and getting me into this phenomenon that we're researching as a collective.
Understandably so. I mean, that would totally rock
Yeah.
my world, especially at that age.
What was so fascinating about it, though, is there was a learning matrix included with that intelligence. That's something we'll touch on later on. Where as it was evolving, I was evolving. And there for a period of time, I realized that it didn't matter what I did. I would go to play video games overnight, sleep over with my friends. And it would be present, and so, we're 8 years old, 9 years old. So my best friend at that point was Jacob Ward, and his mother was single. And so like we're in their apartment and I'm looking across the hallway and I could see, these little kids, they're sleeping in the same bed. I took over Jacob's bed, enough Mountain Dew and Cheetos, we're crashing. And about 3 in the morning, I could hear something displacing its weight on the steps. And then that feeling of dread and fear began to manifest. So I came to the conclusion that it's obviously, at least the evidence suggests, that it's going to be present with me at all time. And so I decided that if it's going to learn from me, I'm going to learn from it. And so that's when I began to employ just a coping mechanism. Whenever I would feel its presence, that's when I would kind of pick at it. Okay, what are you going to do with this emotion? What kind of thoughts? I'm going to monitor my thought processes. What kind of emotions am I feeling? And that's when I really learned that yes, there's a learning matrix being employed, not just by hauntology, ufology, the abduction phenomenon, but by much of what this intelligence represents. It's co-evolving with our species. It's co-evolving, not just evolving according to our awareness of it, but also evolving in order to evade, constantly diversifying its intelligence, not just hiding its face and mask from us, but in many cases employing and allowing us, if you will, to believe it follows certain rules. And then when we go out to contact it, and when it first introduces itself as, okay, I'm a demon, I'm an alien, I'm a hybrid, I'm this, I'm that. And meanwhile, there is a proto intelligence behind the facade that if and when rather we come in contact and make eye contact with it, that's when you see, I see, all of us see that this is something completely alien to us. More demonic than
Wow.
demonic, more
I,
alien than alien. Something
Mr.
that
Gillis,
has.
I have to ask you this question in relation to this knowledge that you just imparted in regards to everything that's going on with disclosure and the notion that there's this proto intelligence that's sort of evolving with the times.
Right.
And with respect to the government, the US government, in the last century alone, with how there's been this increase of technological advancement throughout the decades, I
Hmm.
have to ask you about your research with what historical evidence exists to support the notion that the United States government agencies, such as the Collins Elite,
Right.
the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, to what degree are they engaging with occult or esoteric knowledge in pursuit of technological advancements?
To my knowledge, in the documents we've been able to recover, at least from the 1950s, late 1940s into 1950s, at least. And the last document I saw where the research was still being done to the public, at least released to the public, was 1980s, 1990s. But again, what we're dealing with are facets within our own federal government who will take research, which we'll discuss here in a little bit, will take research from one program, reincorporate it to a newly funded program, and then call it another name. And so we on the outside, right, civilians think, okay, it's a new program. It's not. It's just a new name. So all of the data being collected by the previous group of researchers, funded by, DARPA, whatever you want to call it, BlackRock, anything you want to call it, doesn't matter. It's being reincorporated. And so one generation retires, they sign NDAs, and then another group of researchers step up to bat. And so, that happened in the 1950s, 1967. Actually, there was a program called Operation Often, and it was overseen by a man named Dr. Cameron, Donald Cameron. And when he was finished with, basically, let me back up and say this: when he was finished with his work, it concluded that within authentic and authenticated crop circles, that there was an energy signature and a cellular anomaly discovered in the soil sample. And when the Collins elite took that research, others that they discovered in our government that were doing these rituals, what they discovered that when the proto-intelligence would manifest, that the same cellular anomalies within those soil samples match the soil samples found within authentic crop circles. That information was then reincorporated into Collins elite research. They added Operation Often, right? All of their data into their research and to the various and often enigmatic connections between sorcery and black magic and whatever this intelligence is employing. And so that's just another example where one dies off, just reincorporate it, repackage it, slap another name, and that's where we are. And so yes, that's to my knowledge, our government first began investigating the various occultic intersectionalities late 1948, 1950. And then when Jack Parsons died, that's when it really, really compounded.
Do you think that maybe, because we always hear about, compartmentalization of these different, black projects and stuff that are reverse engineering, et cetera, et cetera. From the sounds of it, though, it might not be. That may be kind of like more appearances, like, that's what they want us to think. But it sounds like there's actually a very joint effort to, again, take some of the information from one and institute it into another program. And these are probably head by, I would guess, by the same people on some level. So it's like, it's not as sorry, go ahead and edit that. It's not as compartmentalized as maybe we might think. Is that
Yeah,
safe to say?
it's not. Yeah, it's not compartmentalized, and the connection between ritual magic and this intelligence has been well documented. Matter of fact, if you looked at the ways this phenomenon has responded to our species, yeah, of course, the data I've collected throughout archaeological texts, ritual balls, yes, the emergence of the first built altars. Okay, when they were firstly erected in antiquity, that's when the phenomenon began to impart technology to us that transcended our known scientific method.
And and then you have things like alchemy, et
Right,
cetera, and what you're talking about with the crop circles and repeatability of
right,
these trace signatures within the soil means that there is definitely a formula that's working and a formula that definitely at play. And so again, to the average person that even pays attention to this kind of subject, we
right.
think that it's all over the place, but actually there's a lot of formation going on and a lot of cross-referencing of information and
Oh, yeah.
components that are like what you would bring into ritual magic.
True, very true. And I think that, if anything, when the Collins Elite incorporated Dr. Cameron's research into their own program, that pulls the mask off of whether or not these are different intelligences. What that means is the same proto intelligence, the same energy signature found in both soil samples. That's profound.
It
And
is.
that's something that our field needs to pay closer attention to, because what that implies, again, is that there is a singular phenomenon here. Something is hiding behind the propaganda designed to diversify its identity in our eyes. Whereas what they said was, okay, sure, we want to call this UFO abduction. Sure, we want to call it hauntology and apparitional theory. But scientifically speaking, which that's a lot for a lot of people, there is something that is singular present. And it furthers the hypothesis that this intelligence is far more interested in being worshiped than it is scientific theory. Sure, well, it's almost like, okay, yeah, we'll give you technology because that's what you really want. But that's on our side of the two sided mirror. What is it wanting from us? And why is it that it is incorporating, again, occult connections, ritual magic, and it's sometimes even using occult transference to self replicate its own species? That is a profound interest of mine, and I believe that it should be, more discussed, I think, in the field.
Definitely. And that came across one of my questions. Is that what
Mhm.
you were referring to as necronetics?
Absolutely.
Which would Yeah, it entail the possibility of entities performing rituals in order to self-replicate their
Yes.
species. Could you expand on that maybe a little bit more, please?
Yes, sir. So within the literature of demonology, there is a certain behavioral pattern that is the largest interconnectivity between the UFO abduction phenomenon, the hybridization program, and what I would consider and others consider to be, the work of demonology itself. That would be, again, the act of inseminating a woman with a fetus, inducing them into a dream state, sometimes feeding them medicinal, like activations, I should say, literally, to where now they're more inclined to be active. We have many cases like that within the UFO abduction phenomenon. But anyways, yeah. So when I was researching demonology, it was like I was researching something that I didn't even realize I was researching. You ever look at a painting and it's made of small little bits? They say, okay, why don't you glare at it or kind of squint rather, and then you see something completely different? That's what it felt like. Because throughout demonology, there is, again, it's the self-replication of species, where you see the woman is placed into a dreamlike state where she can't make decisions. It's not really consent if it's a lie. Number two, they're encountering an entity that looks like someone they've already been intimate with. And then you have the incubus encounter where during that entire scenario, she's inseminated with a fetus. And then suddenly, and I've proven this throughout my research with the debug phenomenon, all of a sudden you have consciousness and the fetus in the same body. And then suddenly, when the phenomenon takes the consciousness out, which is possession, they also take the fetus out, which is pregnancy. And so in my research, I realized that whatever this intelligence is, it's been using that methodology as a way of self-replicating its own species. Well, I didn't realize that if you took all of the highlights of that entire phenomenon, ingesting potions to heighten the sexual nature, okay, inducing the dreamlike states, taking seed that is not from the entity itself, harvesting it from someone else, hello, succubus, and then inseminating the woman with the fetus. And then you have the fetus, then all of a sudden it's missing, and you have the missing fetus syndrome. All of that is highlighted in one single ritual of self-replication, and that is of the mage. That's exactly what it is. It's called the red rite, and it's also called the ultimate black mass, where the practitioner, because they are almost impotent and they're dying, their body is no longer willing to survive much longer. They would go out, they'd take seed, they would inseminate a woman, and they would commandeer the consciousness of that fetus. That's called occult transference. Ufology has hijacked that phenomenon because, again, well, that's new. No, it's not new. It's new to them, but it's not new to those who study the occult and know that this, I believe it's 100% occurring, because there's a reason why the phenomenon doesn't want us to remember certain aspects. And those who do are demonstrating exactly what we would call the ultimate black mass and the red rite. And to further this nuance, it's not just written in incubi, succubi literature. In the debug phenomenon within the 16th century, there existed a behavioral pattern where it's demonstrable. It's the same phenomenon, same methodology. The woman is induced into a dream state. Okay. She meets an entity that appears to be her husband. I've had cases like this. And then at the very end of it, she has intercourse with the entity, not thinking anything of it because it's just a dream. The next day, they go to work. They're looking, they're washing their hands, they're cleaning up. Okay, that was a wild dream last night. They look down and they have ligature marks on their hands and wrists that directly correlate with whatever that intelligence did to them in the dream. This is the 16th century in a place called Safdi, Israel. And so this is within Jewish mythology. It's fascinating. And so these women, the next day, again, they're going through their daily routines. Next thing you know, they start having a splitting of consciousness where they start remembering things. They do not align with their historical record. Then they have, another consciousness is possessing them, seeing through their eyes, using them as a biological avatar. When they go to the exorcist is talking to the intelligence. Who are you? What are you? Why are you possessing this woman? And in the middle of their interrogations, women came forward who were showing, and they did what's called the Lavouche method. They pressed their thumbs on the wrist. They felt two heartbeats in the same body. Hello, pregnancy. Two pulses in the same body. And when the phenomenon plucked the consciousness out of them, it also took the fetus itself both of them were gone. Now, the more troubling aspect of this particular phenomenon is this, that demonologists began to question, was this woman pregnant by the entity, or was she pregnant with it?
That's a good question.
Where else have we seen it?
Ufology, abductee reports. Yep. Well,
Right.
they'll be pregnant. They'll shown signs of pregnancy, and
It's
they'll
gone.
be going through certain term, and then they wake up, or they have another dreamlike experience, or they're abducted up onto the craft, or whatever you will, and the fetus is taken from them. The
Right.
baby is taken from them, and then they're ultimately confused. And a lot of people that would look at such a testimony would say, "Oh, that person is crazy," but really, it could be exactly as you're stating.
Well, that's where I'm coming from, and it's just me. I mean, it's okay if people don't believe that. That's fine. I'm not saying I'm all knowing. What I'm saying is there are traces, there are bloody footprints in the snow here. And if the phenomenon, this proto-intelligence, can diversify itself, then we'll never truly know its source, or its nature. And it's just like a serial killer. Sure, yeah, well, sure, they'll create aliases, but at the end of the day, it's the ritual itself that determines who they are. Again, it's fascinating to me, as dark as it is. It definitely put me on the road to where I am, and that's where I'm going to create a field called necronetics, necromancy and genetics combined, because I believe that is how they're self-replicating. With respect to the debug phenomenon, which we would consider the Dybbuk, right? If you went to a paragon, but the debug phenomenon was not about the relocation of consciousness; it was about the replication of life, which would then mean, mind you, that when religion sits there and tries to monopolize possession, they may very well have this wrong. This phenomenon may be placing its consciousness in people in a transient experience, but it may also be what's called perfect possession, which Malachi Martin, an exorcist from the Vatican, hypothesized that there are some people that are born with consciousness where it's perfectly possessed, where the body itself cannot be separated from the consciousness that's in it, which would then take our model of the hybrid. It would modify it in the sense that the host itself is not the mother. The host itself is, in fact, the fetus they're harvesting, which would lead us to Betty Lucas' case study, where she was abducted and she asked one of the entities, where are you getting these grays? And they said, from the fetuses you're giving them. Now, what this does, though, it also points back to another intersectionality between ritual magic. And that is, we could talk more about that, but that's what necronetics is in a nutshell.
I did have one particular question, and I kind of want to angle it. So, towards the source of demonology in general. As we know, the history of the occult knowledge can be fickle, and a lot of the modern day books are not from a virgin source. Are there some reference of knowledge of demonology in the occult you have found to be completely fake and then fully real?
Well, even if it is fake, let me say this. One of the moments when I started seeing Beyond the Mask was when Ed Warren was going around telling people that he saw a devil or a demon with horns. What we're looking at is it's just like within ufology. Okay, yeah, those are flying discs until they're not, until another witness comes out. Well, that's what I saw with the flying disc. When pop culture, especially with here in the West, where they suggest, okay, yeah, demons have horns. That never happened. That was, again, a Western development. Okay, this is profound, because when you catch, you're going to catch. You're like, okay, wait a minute, and then the phenomenon adjusting and evolving according to, yes, the propaganda would manifest as horn. So now, again, yeah, it would reverse engineer us just as we are trying to do them. And so in a way, again, it's evolving according to our awareness of it. And so what we're really looking at is, okay, where was the first source? Where was the primary sources? Right? And what I've been able to do, along with another researcher who's dead now, but Ariel Masters, profound individual. You guys got to pick up the book. It's Eros and Evil. But he talks about this very subject, even though he comes at it from a very psychological perspective. When we're looking at demonology, even with the number of 666, okay, if you look at the Bothell House, right, and I think it's St. Louis, they had a manifestation, the phenomenon, okay, it's 666 on the closet door. Well, of course, that would, to most people, that would imply it's a demon, right? But 666, according to scholars, especially scholars of the ancient Near East, was demonstrated, I guess, punctuated by what's called gematria. It's when the early authors would apply numbers, numerality, to words. And so 666 happened when you took the numbers and applied them to the letters. It happened to spell out Nero, not just in Greek, but also in Aramaic, 616. And so my question, especially within demonology, was if that is allegedly a demon, why is it catering to the propaganda of Western scholarship, right? That, my friend, is when I started seeing through the mask, wait a minute. It's wanting to appear as a demon to what, according to what people believe demons are. Now, if I went into the Levant, or even let's say like Syria, or went to an area of the world that was catered to, let's say, Islamia, there's no way an entity would be writing 666 on a closet door. Right? You follow me right now? Because that is not their theological tradition. It would lean into the archetype of the jinn. And then when we would approach it as a jinn, some days it would apply. And then other days you encounter the proto-intelligence that's behind it, that, right, evolving according to our awareness of it. So there are things that are fake. We have to watch out for that. But while we're monitoring those motifs, we have to see through the mask and realize that, yes, it's pandering to the idea of what a demon is in the West. Now, let me say this. That would have never occurred if Dr. Michael Heiser was in that house, because he, God rest his soul, was a scholar of the ancient Near East. He knew Gematria. But you know who it would pander to? The soccer mom, who barely knew her linguistics, right? And they would go out and think, oh my God, that is a demon. Meanwhile, secretly, in my perspective, it's a proto-intelligence manipulating both. I hope that answers the question. If not, I'll get more direct.
Do you feel that the phenomenon is co-creating with us? If there's like this push and pull between, is this something that you feel is fully doing whatever it's wanting to do separate from us, and we're kind of a source of energy or whatever for it to kind of draw from? Or do you feel like this is some circles of high magic and stuff, they present like entities that are outside of the person? They're intrinsically a reflection of the person itself, or like the internal. So do you feel this is a synergy between us as humans and these NHI, the non-human intelligence, or the phenomenon in general? Where do you think the source is?
Symbiotic. One of the conclusions that the Collins elite came to was don't believe it. It's astounding. Don't believe it. What I would suggest is this, and I know this by experience. It's not just, okay, we ran experience. No, I experienced this myself. The phenomenon will step into archetypes we give it. And there are researchers that suggest, well, they've told us, well, they can only do, that's the only way they can manifest in our world. Sure, if you believe the mass. If you've never encountered the proto-intelligence of research, if you've never pored over copious amounts of case studies, only to realize I'm being lied to. I'm not researching what I thought I was researching at all. There's something behind this. That's when you start to realize, okay, these soul contracts are lies. I mean, they're again, when you're looking at an intelligence that can diversify its identity, the reason it does that is because each identity is accompanied by rules that we heap upon them. And then they allow us, this is something that Collins elite research too, was that they were under the illusion of control. Well, now I have a certain archetype that they follow until, again, Father Sinister of Amino was a Franciscan priest, until the holy water stopped working, until the Bible didn't work, until something else manifested. And whatever that was, my friends, it played by no rules. And that's when not just the researchers, but the practitioners alike, they come to that conclusion. What is that? I was taught you cannot step outside of the circle of salt, and yet you can, right? That's when, again, I can't stress it enough, where it's like in my own field, I'm like, wait a minute. I thought that demonology consisted of the whole mountain, or vice versa. The whole mountain consisted of demonology. And yet, no, that was just a trail to get to what we're really dealing with. And whatever that is, and again, that's when I decided, okay, strip everything, tear down the walls that we've used to compartmentalize. These are not walls, they're bridges. These are various incarnations Just like a teenager, when they turn 12, okay, this is how tall you are. 15, this is how tall you are. And what we've been doing, from my perspective, is we have compartmentalizing, not realizing these are various evolutions and incarnations of a singular intelligence that by virtue of diversifying itself in our eyes, it's eluded us.
And I know you and Mr. Mara, the esteemed Mr. Mara, have come together, are of the same mind, and that is that we have so much compartmentalization between the paranormal groups, ufology, demonology, whatever have you, and it's time to put that nonsense away. That we're
Right.
dealing with the same phenomena, and that we need to come together and we can figure out more of this topic and what's actually going on,
Oh my
unfortunately,
God.
behind the scenes. And it's really it's putting us at a major disadvantage, obviously, to be so
Yeah.
separated on this topic.
Well, let me say it like this. I know everybody has or most people, some people, I don't know. There's a researcher out there that was on Whitley Strieber's show recently, and he's connected to the British Ministry of Defense. And he basically said it was staggering to me, because I'm like, wait a minute. And I know everybody again has reservations about certain researchers, but Nick Pope was like, look, he goes, I know for a fact that the bodies, the NHIs we have in our possession, have interdimensional characteristics. Full stop. Full stop. What do you mean? Are these bodies apparitional? Right? Are these the beings that we've been seeing in seances that can solidify, or literally they can materialize half of the apparition to a touch and the other half you can see through? Is that interdimensional? See, they're playing with semantics here. And so I ran it through one of my channels, also used to work for the Ministry of Defense. Is this true? Yes. What? Is
No,
this
you're sorry.
why? Right.
I'm
Is
sorry.
this why in the skull experiment in the 1990s, they thought they were contacting people on the other side in an entity, Mr. Blue appeared to them? Is it possible, again, that what we're looking at, and one of the reasons why it's diversifying its identity, is so that it could bait us into a contact experience and then manifest as whatever it truly is? We cannot articulate, we do not have the vocabulary to articulate this intelligence. And what we're discovering now, at least I and my colleagues, is that we don't even know when the experience actually begins. We were taught by ufology the experience begins with the UFO. Not true. The experience begins with Tim Taylor picking up the first stone, laying it on the other in the desert in New Mexico. That's when the encounter begins, and perhaps even with the first thought. And so that's what I've been doing in retracing steps of this phenomenon. I don't care what we call it. It doesn't matter to me anymore. And I know I'm rambling, but I'm just shooting from the hip here. Because again, we have to kick down these walls and build bridges.
Yes.
Because that's the only way we can get deeper into this.
My own experiences, contact at a very base level was initiated by myself and my fiance. Straight up. Had we not been open to it, had we not done what we were doing, which was nothing major, nothing ritualistic in the common sense, okay, then we wouldn't have had the experiences that we had with before. And my other thing about the interdimensionality is these entities that we've talked to have stated such that they are interdimensional beings too, both her and I at the same time. And all of a sudden, I start hearing interdimensional beings throughout all of society and culture. Now it's everywhere. I'm just left pondering right now that there has to be some organization or some group, maybe even the presence itself, I'm not sure, that is slowly pulling out these little plugs of the dam that's keeping the water back, by having key phrases like interdimensionalities just start hitting the public, like Grush going in front of Congress and he's saying, oh no, they're interdimensional, and then all of a sudden it's a buzzword. How long it lasts, I don't know, but it's out there, whereas previously it wasn't. So there's something's going on behind the scenes somewhere,
right,
to where they're just allowing us to have like maybe just a little morsel of the correct information, which I just find
and there's a lot of depth in that morsel. I mean, oh my God. I mean, interdimensionality, what are we dealing with here? But back to Daniel's question, it's profound. The reason I have experience, no, because I want to make sure I answer it, because I can picture it. Yeah, so I do believe there's a symbiotic relationship, the phenomenon, it conjures within us. And within that symbiotic relationship, at times it can turn parasitic. And what do I mean by symbiotic relationship? Okay, does it come to us or does it come through us? Both. The cognitive interfaces the phenomenon has employed in times past, the archetypes it steps into, often come from the consciousness and images within the mind of the experiencer. I had an experiencer I was working with, and she was being abducted as a kid, and she said that it was abducting her. They would come into her room, but they manifested. And as silly as this sounds, because she told me that herself. So I know it sounds silly, but this is how it happened. It would manifest as her favorite cartoon. Okay. Why? Because it's plucking an image out of her mind. Not unlike the incubus phenomenon, right? Oh, okay, cool. I'll be an ex-lover, right? Where are you getting the imagery? Right here. So it's not just coming to the experiencer. In many cases, it's coming from. And in that symbiosis, that's where that symbiotic relationship manifests within the cognitive interfaces. But within this particular case study, she said that they would manifest as her favorite cartoons, her favorite comic book character, and then like for 3 or 4 or 5 years, it never happened again. She thought she was in the clear. Okay, great, and then it manifested again, and as the same program. But the phenomenon failed to realize she had evolved, and so now she said we're standing next to each other. This is what blows my mind. And that's when it started putting things together. Wait a minute, she's older. The image I'm stepping into, the archetype I'm manifesting as, doesn't fit this situation. And she said, that's when I realized I don't believe you are who you're appearing as, because I'm no longer reading those comic books. I outgrew those. I'm no longer watching those cartoons. For a fleeting moment, she said, its eyes, the bulbous eyes, began to move. And she said, in a way, she said, this is the only way I can explain it. It was measuring my belief in the image. So if we're going to be discussing, okay, aliens that manifest and traverse thousands and thousands of light years, land their ship to walk into a 12-year-old girl only to measure her belief in the image it's manifesting. And by the way, I guess that kind of destroys the hypothesis, just like they told George Adamski, well, we can only manifest, right, as humans or things that we could pluck out of. No, because again, that symbiotic relationship, that tethered them before, it was not there. And so that is a hint that there are times when it is not co-evolving with us, or the program has not updated itself according to our human evolution. Hint, hint, 666. Again, so we have to see through these archetypes. But to answer the question more specifically, I guess, yes, it's both present with and absent from. What's present with us is the mask. That's Dr. Barry Fitzgerald told me that, because I said that in the show. What's present with us and absent from. And he kind of added that portion to it. But he's right. What's present with us is just the archetype. What's absent from us, all at the same time, is the proto-intelligence behind it. So yes, it is symbiosis. And there have been case studies that I've had in my own research where within a flash, it can change from symbiotic, and it can take all of the knowledge about the experiencer it has amassed and employ that in parasitic nature. Boom. Now you're my host. Instantly.
Chris?
So what comes to light, like what is something that I've noticed, is that in this day and age is that everything seems to be escalating to a certain point, right? Like we've talked about this phenomenon for like decades, and now it's starting to be talked about even more now. And you have even members of Congress mentioning interdimensional beings, and it's just on center stage now. And it seems like we're getting to this point where something might happen, or something weird is going to happen, maybe on a mass scale, who knows. The one thing I notice is that the collective is also split, right? So we have people who have negative experiences with the phenomena, and then you have people who claim to have positive experiences with the phenomenon. Both sides both have evidence to validate, at least for themselves, that that is the case.
Mm-hmm.
And to be clear, I have both had very positive experiences with the phenomenon, very loving, and it's like you kind of know the difference between love and fake love, or cynicism, or uh, narcissism, that kind of energy. But again, both were very real. Both were very real to me. So why do you think there is that split between us, where it's just like, if completely nefarious or completely evil in nature, why not stay evil in nature? Why show yourself in like a loving light? Because at the same time, that's the part that doesn't make sense to me personally. Like, why would it show, like, but again, it comes, it's a mask thing too. Like, well, let's just start there, because I have more I wanted to throw in there, but I just want to know like what you think about that. Why you think there's that split between like.
Well, I am one again. I do believe that there are people that have had positive experiences. That's fine.
Right.
I'm not here to ignore that aspect of the phenomenon. But also, I don't like people who think that's all love and light and ignore the darker
Yeah.
aspects of this phenomenon.
It gets.
If we're going to look at the light, we got to look at the dark too.
I've seen
can't.
some. Yeah, I totally believe you too, because I've like had like a very dark, kind of like you, like a being showing up, and it freaked me out. But yeah, continue. Sorry.
Well, I mean, okay, what are some of the darkest beings we know? What do we think of? I mean, honestly, and does a serial killer kill 100% of the time? No, no. Many of them had families, feather families, lived a good life, deacons. And so what I'm looking at again, are we defined by the positive? Okay, or are we defined by the negative? I think, again, if we're looking at an intelligence that can control emotions, control memories, then it's like, okay, what can we trust? And if we can't trust it, what kind of an intelligence would present itself as negative if it wasn't negative? Now, you do know what could present itself as positive if it was negative, but it could present itself as positive as well. But I don't know where I am on that. I mean, we're dealing with percentages at this point, right? I don't know, but I can tell you this. I am studying the darker nuances of it. I'm not ignoring the positive. That's ludicrous. But it's equal. I mean, I've had people that have come forward with negative encounters. They were excluded from documentaries because that narrative was wanting to be pushed more than others. And so there is a profound amount of obfuscation here in the field. I mean, not just that, but I know for a fact people have been hired by entire conglomerates, think tank, who have purchased their voices. Give me the results of your research. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't put lipstick on the pig. However, when you go out to tell them, this is what we want you to tell them. Think about that. Where their research is financed, we'll book all the, I know this because we'll book all the conferences for you, okay? And at the end of the day, you're going to come home, you're going to give us all your data. And regardless if your data is negative, you're going to go out and tell the population it's all love and light. So if we're dealing with a phenomenon that can manage our perceptions of it, that is a problem for me. Or like this, the reason I'm assaulting you is because you agreed to it. The equivalent of taking a toddler's hand, hitting him on the head. Stop doing this to yourself. Stop doing that. Ludicrous. And I don't have time for that. Because again, I think that as good as some of these encounters are, sure. Okay, if you're looking at good, what do we include good as? Okay, they're nice to us until they pull you out of your body. And they're doing that to children. They're doing that to every major, they're doing that to members of every major religion. And so what I'm looking at again is, okay, if the postulation is okay, well, why aren't they doing this 100% of the time? Maybe they're doing other things, right? I mean, yeah, I get that. So I think it's more nuanced than that, of course. But I think that the good they're doing is far less than the bad they're doing. That's just my position. And again, yeah, sure, they have families. That's great. But what are they doing in the darkness? Because to me, that's what defines it more. Nobody, look, okay, you think our government's like, okay, yeah, they're not a threat because they have bakeries? No, they have bakeries, right? They have a great economy, right? Do they have nuclear weapons? Absolutely. And that is what they look at. Now, if we're looking at intent, okay, yes. We have cases where near-death experiences have occurred, where the phenomenon will literally, we don't know if it's in the actual apparition of the person or not, regardless, not regardless, it's not a word, but regardless, who cares? The fact is, the phenomenon knows where people die. They know what kind of clothes they die in. The phenomenon knows when people will die. They told Betty Luca, your children will die. She couldn't remember it. She was suffering PTSD until she got on the phone with Ray Fowler and was like, listen, I don't know what this is. Something's wrong. They did memory regression, and sure enough, they told her. And they died. For you guys and for those who are going to be watching the show that are unfamiliar with my research, I had a case study, a remote viewer who was encountering guides, but his encounter with his guides, they were unique. They weren't like, okay, I'm at a seance. No, he would be in a room, a metal room, a metallic room. The floor was metal, the walls were metal, and he's being flanked on each side by his guides who appeared, literally, physically appeared to be his guides. When he starts looking around, he starts feeling really weird, and he starts questioning, just like that other experiencer did. Are you who you are presenting yourselves to be? That's when the phenomenon got very uncomfortable. That's when he said it changed its appearance to something inhuman. Next thing he knows, he's back into his body. He has a massive heart attack at the hospital. I just talked to his son the other day at the hospital when they're taking his shirt off, right? And they're putting on a robe, trying to get him just comfortable and everything. From underneath his skin were subdermal scarifications, amulets, moving themselves. We see that in hauntology, moving themselves from underneath the skin to the surface. In one of them was an arching Egyptian hieroglyph. I've sent that out to actual practitioners within mystery schools in every major religion, and none of them have been able to quantify or even qualify what those were supposed to be. Can I suggest that ritual magic has been a way that we have used to influence them? If that is what we've been doing, then who are they influencing when they're writing and carving these amulets into us? I'm telling you, we don't have the vocabulary, and the gatekeepers we have in this field, they will not let this come forward.
Do you think that, because now that you mentioned that, when you're talking about like dark magic and everything, what came to mind like immediately just a second ago was just the Nazis, right?
Mhm.
It's almost like they had that awareness of the occult, and there was some kind of combination of the two that they were aware of at the time and messing with things. So that's just
Right.
immediately what jumped out at me.
And technology, right? We all want technology. That's what our government wants. Okay, well, we reverse engineer it and everything. What is technology to them? Because I've traced this phenomenon into corners of Syria in the early and late Iron Ages, okay? At the erection of altars where something in the darkness wanted to incarnate. What did it want? It didn't respond to technology. It responded to worship. And so then these practitioners who were classified as idolaters by the religious system, whatever, strip it from the dogma, look at the data, they began to build their altars under the cosmology of the stars. Why? That darkness was pregnant. It wanted to become incarnate. That is the symbiotic relationship. It's present with, but it's absent from. And so what they began to do is they were doing, okay, let's go out there. Where at? Okay, we'll go to the New Mexico desert, Jack Parsons, or a desert in Syria, in the Middle East, and we'll begin to build altars. That's what it wanted us to do. Now, the advent of altars, that's when you start having the implantation of consciousness. Another way they self-replicate. What was that considered? That was called the teraphim, where the practitioner, out of nowhere, mind you, the primordial man, yeah, I want you to go get a small piece of metal. They didn't come up with that. The phenomenon did. And I want you to carve the name of an unclean spirit into this metamaterial. And then I want you to implant that into another body. And the consciousness that was in the darkness, pulsating, now it has a biological avatar. Now it's seeing through your eyes. That's a way they've self-replicated. There's a book behind me. It's called Beyond UFOs, where in there, there's a case study of a young man who had in his body an implant. And he said one night it turned on. And when it did, now he's seeing through the eyes of his abductors as they're hovering over his house. Who was seeing through his? Where is this technology coming from? Mind you, it's the same, again, it's the same methodology where these practitioners would go find portals to the underworld, and they would situate themselves within the proximity of the phenomenon. And then the phenomenon would give them technology. If, in fact, incantations are merely ladders made of letters, then what are we really encountering? Why is Tim Taylor going out there in New Mexico, building altars underneath the cosmology of the stars? Why? We don't want altars. We want technology. And so it panders to us. It's strange. Yes, my model of the intelligence, forget demonic or alien, far deeper, far deeper.
Mr. Gillis, I'd love to ask you this question. You talked earlier about how this proto-intelligence or this phenomena throughout historical antiquity,
Mhm.
you've even cited back into your research with ancient Mesopotamia and how we've traditionally, as humankind, have built these altars, these places of worship in order to interact or interface
Mhm.
with this proto-intelligence. If we extrapolate that to the modern era, right?
Yeah.
And we have various schools of thought. For instance, human initiated contact protocol.
Mhm.
And I remember in a couple of interviews that you've done off of YouTube, you've always posited this really fascinating question: who is summoning who? How can we distinguish, or how can we know as to whether these influential figures who promote this love and light narrative, how can
Mhm.
we know that they are under the influence of something benevolent or something that has historically been characterized as manipulative?
Don't contact them. I mean, let me say it like this. Again, we got to start. This is another fragment, remnant of us compartmentalizing the phenomenon.
All right.
If we're looking at altars and the rite of conjuring, we're looking at Albert Bender, one of the very first contactees, building an altar in Nevada. George Hunt Williamson contacting NHI, right, non-human intelligence, until multiple voices are coming out of his mortal frame. What is that exactly? Where have we seen that? See, the problem is we cannot control this intelligence. And what concerns me specifically, okay, let's do another case study. In the 90s, the skull experiment, okay? Skull experiment, a group of seances occurred, a group of parapsychologists, psychic mediums, they come together, and people who have lost their loved ones, let's contact people on the other side. And so the phenomenon did that. Okay, sure, I'll play the role of the archetype. And then in the middle of that, there were two things that occurred. Number one, Mr. Blue manifested. Mr. Blue is an alien. Okay, he's got big bulbous eyes, the same frame. They called him Mr. Blue because he turned blue when they took a picture of him. Manifest. In addition to that, downstairs, the basement, they had a guide that manifested. Okay, this guide built itself from the ground up. And when it did, it began rolling its head and telling one lady, I think it was, how, oh, I'm your guide, so and so. Remember me? And says the guide's name. I'm the guide. The problem is profound evil filled the room and everything was shut down. We got to get out of here. It's done. Why? Why? That is akin, and I said this before in another interview, that is akin, George, of me saying, yes, your deceased loved one, there's a number for your deceased loved one, and you can call it. And then when you call it, another species answers the phone. Would make me question who authored the number. Is, again, what are we dealing with here? That leads me to believe that the encounter begins with a thought to build the altar. The experience begins with the obedience of this is what I want you to do. Matter of fact, it is alleged, and I say it's alleged because, again, if we have background in demonology, we know what's happening. Allegedly, one of the experiencers was told by another scientist that was in the desert building altars that now you are going to move in the next stage. Now you can go into churches and lay hands on people. Time out. That's not an extraterrestrial thing. That is a rite of exorcism found in biblical antiquity. It was the rite of casting out or casting in a spirit. What is going on here? And why is it, again, that we believe, or allegedly, that the conjuring begins when we build the altar? No, it doesn't. It begins when we begin to exchange our time for theirs. The moment we drive out, where am I going? I don't know, to an undisclosed location. That means that you're the one being conjured. And this is exactly what the college elite realized. They allowed us to believe in the illusion of control up until the proto-intelligence, up until it's no longer dear Aunt Edna we're talking to. Now you're dealing with something else, something we no longer have rules for.
It's like Betty and Barney Hill. You know, the story of Betty and Barney Hill, very famous. They're driving back home from wherever, doesn't matter. And they're on a road that they just don't recognize. Betty, I mean, I've listened to the hypnosis tapes, and she's like, you know, where are we going? He's like, I don't know, I'm on a road somewhere.
Right.
You know, and then they see up ahead, they think it's a broken down car. There's people over there, broken down car, and then it changes, and they're fearful. They're both fearful, and they're taken up aboard this craft, and experiments are done on them. And you know, then all of a sudden they're back in their car. They don't really.
Yeah.
After Barney says this, he doesn't remember any of it. He says, "Man, I wish I could go with them. That was a great experience." So it became like this fear. You know, that, like you were saying, they were led. They didn't even know they were led to this
Yeah.
area that they didn't even. And we're just talking to average Americans, right? So they don't have any knowledge of the occult or anything of the sort. But they were still drawn to an area that was outside of their normal travel,
Yeah.
and then brought to this secluded area, and then brought back up onto a craft and had experiments on them. And then when they got put back into their vehicle, man, everything's great, man. That was a wonderful experience. Even Betty saying that when she was getting tested on, when they were putting a needle in her navel, that
Yeah.
she was crying about the needle going into her navel. And then afterwards, it was pretty much like a thank you. Well, you guys are awesome. I love you so much. And then they get put back in their car, and then they're filled with love. If a entity species, whether they're demonic, wherever, interdimensional, whatever have you, if they're taking you against your will, then how is that benevolent? Like, you know, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I'm kind of curious. Would you mind hearing a little bit of an experience that I had,
Sure.
Nathaniel?
That's fun.
Okay. So, Melissa, that's my fiance and I. You know, we've been using like a spirit box. We've been using dowsing rods, channeling rods, and such to contact this entity group. And they've always come across as positive. Okay, and still up to this point, having the conversation with you, I still feel that they're positive, but you know, I mean, they may not be. That doesn't matter. So, there was one night. I mean, we've been doing this for about a year and a half now. So there was one night I went to the restroom. I came back out. She was in the kitchen, and she's looking at me, and her face is white and her eyes are huge. And I said, "What's the matter?" Because I had just left her, and we were in a good mood. And she said she felt something coming around her and like starting to choke her and take her breath out of her body. And that when I came out of the bathroom, it went away. Okay. And I was kind of confused, and I started trying to talk to her and find out more information. Now, I've had a heart attack probably about 5 years ago. And I started saying, you know, we're not going to have any of that kind of negative, you know, if your negative entity cast you out of the house, you know, whatever have you. And then I felt a punch in my heart, like a spiritual punch in my heart. And I sat down because I had to. And then after, we still felt it was lingering in the house. And so I'm not getting into too much detail, but we thought that we had cast it out. Okay. We rejected it. We heard it leave over the spirit box. 2 nights later, we're sleeping in bed. And this is the point I want to get to. That was just a little preface. And I'm having this dream about being with friends, and friends I hadn't seen for a long time. And suddenly the dream kind of changed, where I saw these like entities, and it's silly. I've told other people about this, that they seemed like they were like poopy emojis, right? And there were these other little kids around in my dream, and I was like, "What's with the brownie people?" And they said, "No, that's the cookie people." And then suddenly I was out of the dream, and I could feel it's like you said, there's words that just can't there's no descriptive words for some things, whether that be, you know, feelings, emotions, whatever have you. So I'm feeling that my spirit is separated from my body just a little bit. I can still physically feel the comforter. I can still physically feel my head on the pillow. Okay. And suddenly I am hit, and I could feel her next to me with this huge sense of euphoria in coming out of a dream state, or if it was a dream state or whatever have you, a hypnagogic I've never experienced before. And my automatic thought pattern was, oh my God, they're here. They're here. They're in the room. I have to wake up Melissa. I have to, but I can't move my arm. But this isn't sleep paralysis. I've had sleep paralysis before. This is something separate. I'm kind of
Right.
halfway in and halfway out of my body. And suddenly in the distance, I hear what sounds like a Jack in the Box music, but it's warped. Dun, 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 dun. And it's all of a sudden that euphoria turns to deep fear, like that. Okay. And I feel this presence that's like holding down my body, specifically my face. And I'm looking through the fingers, okay, whether the soul, whether through my body, whatever. I'm still very confusing, but I still feel like I was not in my body 100%. And I'm seeing this dark, shadowy figure, okay, not a lot of detail through the fingers. And it says, and I'll try to mimic it, and not trying to be dramatic, but this is what it sounded like as much as I can replicate. It's time to go. And I said, well, hold on, because I'm still trying to gather my wits about me. I'm like, let me tell Melissa. And the music's still going and everything. And the entity says, you're not coming back. And I'm like, well, I want to tell her that I'll be right back. Well, you're not coming back. And I'm like, I'm not going. I said, I am not going. And then suddenly I snapped out of it and I sat up. Presence was gone. But for half an hour, or probably even longer, I felt the hand imprint that was holding my head down to the pillow that I was looking through the fingers. And that was the wildest experience I think I've ever had. And so naturally, I'm thinking to myself, have I been strung along this entire way? It's a natural thought. I think it's a healthy thought to have. Okay. Now, days later, there was another dream to where I was dreaming that she was where she was wandering around the house and I was following her. She'd go into the foyer, she'd go into the kitchen, she'd go into the living room. And I start hearing this music again. It's different. Now it's got some kind of dark twist to it, but it's got this, obviously, I mean, I thought even in the stream that that's baloney, where it's like this, like angelic kind of things trying to cover some vocal is trying to cover up this distortion of this music, right? And she's going into the living room and I'm trying to follow her and I'm feeling this dark presence kind of following us, right? And she's going towards the living room door. And I said, honey, don't open that door. Don't do it. And she opens it up a little crack. And I said, stop. And she stopped. But she can't move. And I said, turn your head, because the presence was behind us. And we turned our head and I said, do you see it? Do you see it? And it was a dark form that its arms up and it was kind of doing this, but they were all the way up. And it was just slowly encroaching on us, trying to instill that fear, trying to take over whatever, abduct our souls, which is what I felt like on the first one, the first dream that I told you about. I was trying to abduct my soul. It was holding down my body to try to pull out my soul. And I woke up and she was just coming out of the living room to sit back down on the bed. And I said, did anything weird happen? She goes, no, I was just getting some food for the dogs. And I said, well, she goes, you know, I haven't fallen asleep yet. And I said, well, I looked at the phone and I said, 3 hours have passed. And she said, there's no way at all that 3 hours could have passed because we just laid down. I said, no, 3 hours passed. So we had missing time. Okay. We had missing time in that scenario. And I'm curious, and I'm not expecting anybody to have answers. I can just go off my gut feeling. And I'm sorry for this being so long. My gut feeling is that after that first experience, I'm like almost maybe just a little bit getting used to it. And so I was trying to protect her from something bad happening while she was unaware of what was going on. And so I was like trying to, like, maybe my soul was going out to try to stop her, but it seemed like dream. I think dreams is one of the things they could definitely access into your psyche and
Oh yeah.
mold you into your
Yeah.
subconscious, right? Again, then there was one more, and I'm trying to keep you up to recent. This was last week and a half, okay, where we were in the house and they started coming towards us, and we're shutting doors, right? In the dream, we're shutting doors, and because they're like, let's say they're advancing to us through the hallway, we shut the door. We're trying to barricade it, right? And then the door, they're like manipulating the door. The door starts bending like it's rubber, okay? And these dark hands, much like what was holding my head down, okay, this dark hand comes through, and it's like by a forearm and a hand. And I was just like, when are you guys? I'm not falling for this crap. You're not going to be doing this to me, because again, I refuse. And I actually like bit one of the fingers in this dream. I bit one of the fingers, kind of like knuckle off, when it was in this like black rubbery glove. It was the weirdest thing, but I could feel it in my mouth. And I heard this scream when I did that of pain that was not human at all. Not human at all. And then I woke up and I was just like, the first thing I said, except for the other two times, but this was completely different. I said, really? Like, I can't get it. You're not letting me sleep. But I just feel like these aren't regular dreams. I haven't had dreams like this before. It's just wild. So I know that's a lot to chew on. And I'm sorry for going into this long diatribe about it. But it just seems that there's definitely something nefarious at play. Oh, most definitely. And I do think that at some point in time, it probably tried to do some kind of soul abduction or transference. And I'm a very serious guy. I don't like to go out on ledges, but I know what I feel.
I think they have been doing that for a while, and a lot of these dreams are actual memories. That's the problem, and we're getting down to the root cause and the root of its nature. I mean, it's one thing to be taken without your permission; it's another to be taken without your knowledge. To where, I've had cases where the person's on the highway, the truck driver who looks down at his clock, it's 8:30. Next thing he knows, literally, the next stream of consciousness is he's in a passenger seat. His clothes are disheveled, halfway on, halfway off. The police officer is knocking on the window. So yeah, some of these aren't really dreams. They're memories, but they're trapped in that liminal state, in the space between the body and the soul. Seemingly what we're dealing with. It's soulish, yes. It's also embodied, yes. But there's a space in between those two that this intelligence seems to abide in. But here's another. It's fascinating. But a good friend of mine in Massachusetts told me, he's a researcher, something similar to that, but it's still pretty terrifying. He said that as a kid he would get sick and he would go into like fits of rage, get real angry because he couldn't do anything, couldn't go out and play. He was out of school, and just he was done. He's like, I'm sitting laying in my bed rather, and he said at nighttime, he's like, I would stay up, and he said I would be paralyzed by fear. He's like, so here I am. I'm a little guy. He's like, I'm trying to sleep, but I couldn't. He said, I'm sick. And next thing I know, I would feel this presence in the room. And he said, then I kept feeling my body and he's like, I separated from my body. And he said, I didn't understand what was going on until out of the corner of my eye, I saw a being in the room. Yeah, it sounds like love and light to me. And he's in there and he's like, he goes, one thing is like, okay, at one point it's there. I see it. The next thing I know, I couldn't find it in the room. He said, it's gone. Then I see that my body is now moving without me being in it. Now, what would we call that?
Possession.
Right. And so then he says, now I'm looking down at my body. And he said, all of a sudden, a language was coming out of my mouth. It was like a kind of a really like a buzzing, chirping sound. And he said, at that point, I realized where that being went. The reason it's not over there is because it's in my body. The reason it pulled me out was so that it could pull itself in. And so now he said his body's looking around the room. And then finally it looks directly up at him. And he said, now I'm out of my body staring into my own eyes.
Oh shit, that's like a disembodied astral projection kind of.
Oh, it was, yeah. Yeah. And, they do that because they love us. And I'm trying to make it plain here because it's like, okay, yeah. And that's good if we want to sell tickets to sell merchandise. But if we want to get down to the data and look at this and say, okay, the threat is not defined by what kind of gifts they give. The threat is defined by who and how they treat people.